Guten Erev Sukkot. How's everybody doing? Excited to be learning with you with Sukkot arriving this evening. Welcome everybody. Okay. Just one second. Sorry about that. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that the notification went out on the AT app when we go live. Nina usually does that. She's preparing a lot of work to do for Sukkot, and she handled that, and I should have known that she would. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Wednesday afternoon? Joe wishing everyone Hag Sameach. Bill in Mid-Missouri. And Gordo in Scotland. Sharon in New Jersey. Joe, are you going to shake the esrog and the lulav? Yes, God willing, but I can't do it right now because I haven't tied it yet. My son just arrived late last night. We put up the sukkah this morning. We decided to rinse off the schach, the roofing of the sukkah. That was in deep storage all year. It's out on the lawn now drying. We're going to put it up on top of the sukkah, and then some have the custom to tie the branches of the willow tree and the myrtle together with the palm to create the lulav inside the sukkah. Some people just do it in the store. I like to tie it together in the sukkah, but it's not a sukkah without the schach, so that's going to happen after the show. I did go shopping yesterday for the esrog and the lulav. And it's always an interesting experience because it's just a funny thing. An esrog is a citron, like a lemon. And there are beautiful esrogim and super beautiful esrogim and hyper beautiful esrogim. So basically, what you're paying for is the esrog, the palm branch. People actually spend time picking the palm branch as well. There's some qualities that make them a little better, a little tighter, a little longer. And then with the willow and the myrtle, you just want them to be nice, clean, well-formed leaves. But the esrog is what it's all about, and you can spend for your set, but really the difference is the esrog, anywhere from $50 to $1,000. And I mean, some esrogim, it's kind of, okay, you look at it, like that's a magnificent esrog, but I'm just not, any kind of esrog expert. So I certainly don't know what is the difference between a $50 esrog, an $80 esrog, a $100 esrog. And it's almost like I just decide how much money I'm going to spend that year. And then I go in and I'll definitely look through a few of them. And I just feel like one of them just calls to me. But there are some guys, like you see them in the store, and they will, look at every esrog in the store, pick them up, inspect it. Some of it pitum, the kind of like stem with a rounded top at the end. Some don't. If you get one with the pitum and then the pitum breaks off, then that esrog is invalidated, disqualified. You can't use it anymore. But we take that chance. We go with the esrog that has a pitum. That's our custom. But it's a whole experience. It's definitely a whole experience. And anyway, I'm sorry I can't bring it in now because I haven't tied it together. But let's see if I could do that later in the holiday. I do want to teach from the sukkah, not Saturday night, but like maybe Sunday evening. I'll try to do that, give the class from the sukkah, and then maybe I could show those things while we're there. Okay, at any rate, we are continuing our journey. And did I look over on the YouTube side? I think I did. Welcome Ella, welcome Samantha, welcome Spencer, welcome Marjorie. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I ran out. Okay. Our daf is page 116 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Continue our journey through chapter 8, and specifically Mishna number 2, which God willing we're going to complete today. And we're talking about that order of inheritance and which relatives precede other relatives, being closer to the deceased, etc. Now, yesterday, just at the end of class, Sharon brought up a good question where it seemed like, that we investigate, does, if somebody dies and leaves no relatives, how are we going to find the closest relative? And that there was a derivation of the word where ein lo, like he has no relative, right? Ein lo, there is none to him. And then we said we investigate. And then it seemed like we were saying based on the cognate, the same letters, that it could be pronounced ein, right? There is no, there's not, or ayin. Now, ayin sounds like the word for I, but ayin is spelled with the first letter is an ayin, which is one of those silent letters that carries a vowel, or aleph, right? So if it's spelled with an ayin, it means ayin, I. But that is not that derivation that we were talking about yesterday where you go and investigate with your eye, look to see if there are any other relatives. Rather, sometimes ein, aleph, yud, nun, is pronounced ayin, or can be thought of as ayin, but with an aleph. So there what they're saying is that these same letters, aleph, yud, nun, can either mean something that exists but is not there, right? So it's an empty space because something is missing. Or it can mean ayin, ein, aleph, yud, nun, that it never existed at all. It's not that there's something that exists somewhere else but is missing here. Rather, it's something that never existed at all. So in other words, if there, maybe the next one in line has died, but we can go to the grandson or the granddaughter, as we'll see today, so then that line of inheritance has been preserved. But if there are no descendants, right, it's not that something is missing, it's that it doesn't exist at all. That's what we have to determine through investigation. And that's why ein and ayin are related and can suggest more investigation is necessary. So hopefully that was an answer to your question, Shan. Okay, we picked this up about halfway down page 115b, which is a short page, with Rav Huna says that Rav says, with regard to anyone who says that a daughter of the deceased should inherit the estate of her father, along with the daughter of the son of the deceased, even if he is a prince of the Jewish people, one should not listen to him, as this is nothing other than an act of the Sadducees and runs counter to the ruling of the Mishna that the descendants of a son inherit before a daughter. What happened? A man leaves some property. He had a son. The son died tragically before the father, predeceased the father. The one we're talking about, who's now dying and leaving property, so what does he leave? He left one daughter. Right? So he had a son and a daughter in his lifetime. His son died before he died, so he leaves a daughter. But the son that he had and that predeceased him also married and had a child, and that's a daughter. So now the man who is leaving property is leaving behind a daughter and a granddaughter. And the granddaughter is the daughter of his son that predeceased him. So the question is, who inherits? His daughter or his granddaughter by way of his son? Now we know that in this patriarchal system, if there's a brother and a daughter who are both alive when the father dies, so the brother inherits, he has an obligation to take care of his sister, but a son inherits from his father. If the son has died, and leaves no children, then his sister, the remaining daughter, or if there's multiple daughters, the daughters inherit, just like in the case of Slofchad in the Torah. But if the son who predeceased his father did have his own child, even if it's a daughter, she inherits ahead of his sister. So where this man leaves property and his only seeming heirs are his daughter and his granddaughter, right? There's the man who dies. He leaves a son and a daughter. The son died, but that guy left a daughter. So there's a daughter and a granddaughter to the man with property. His property goes to the granddaughter. The daughter does not inherit. Probably this granddaughter has an obligation to sustain her aunt from this estate. But this daughter does not inherit alongside the granddaughter. Now, there was a time in Jewish history where the Sadducees had some power, and they ruled that this daughter does inherit along with the granddaughter, that they would split the estate. That is not Jewish law. And this problem of the Sadducees, and the basic idea of the Sadducees was we only follow the written Torah, and we don't accept the authority of the rabbis, the tradition of the rabbis, of Chazal, right, our Chachamim, the sages of Israel, who it says in the Torah that you will ask questions of your elders in that generation. And we know that the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, the seeds of it were given to Moses at Mount Sinai, and then passed from teacher to student ever since. And that's what we're learning today. And Judaism is rabbinic Judaism. The prayers that we say, the order of the prayers, the 3 daily prayer services, which we have now in the absence of the Holy Temple, and the offerings, which we can no longer make because the temple was destroyed, etc. The way we practice Judaism is our inheritance, as taught to us by that oral tradition. The Sadducees rejected the oral tradition and were an incredibly dangerous and harmful force, which eventually was defeated and thrust out. But remember, when we made our journey through Yoma, the tractate on Yom Kippur, and we just recited this in synagogue during Yom Kippur, the instructions that were given to the high priest during Yom Kippur. And part of that instruction was that they cried, right? The sages that were teaching the high priest cried, and he cried, because they had to question him and make sure that he was not one of the Sadducees, not influenced by the Sadducees, who would try to sort of twist the avoda, the worship, the actions of the high priest on Yom Kippur according to their own interpretation, or let's say non-interpretation of the written Torah. And recall that the written Torah, without the oral tradition, doesn't really make sense. The big example that we always give is what is tefillin, right? And it says in the Torah that we have to bind these words as a sign upon our hands and a symbol before our eyes. What is that? It doesn't spell out, the black box with the leather straps, etc. That was given orally. There were other teachings given directly to Moses orally, and others were left by God to our sages to interpret over the generations. Okay, so here, this idea that a daughter would inherit alongside a granddaughter of the deceased was a Sadducee idea, and here it's just being fully repudiated. And so Rav Huna is saying in the name of Rav that somebody who says that a daughter inherits alongside a granddaughter in the situation I've explained is under the influence of the Sadducees and is trying to undermine Judaism. As it is taught in a Baraisa in Megillas Tainis, right, which is about the book about fasts and how we fast and when we fast, which describes various minor holidays on which it is forbidden to fast or eulogize. On the 24th of Tevet, of the Hebrew month of Tevet, we return to our law, meaning that the law, the halacha, was established in accordance with the opinion of the sages after having been dictated by the Sadducees. How could that happen? Well, the Sadducees at a certain point had some influence and power, by currying favor with the monarchy, who had kind of imposed their view on the nation. Lasted a short time, and thank God it was ended. As the Sadducees would say, a daughter should inherit the estate of her father alongside the daughter of the son of the deceased, a daughter with a granddaughter. Now, the Baraisa continues, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai joined them to discuss their ruling and said to them, imbeciles, from where do you derive this ruling? And there was no person that answered him anything, except for one old man. So he was saying to the Sadducees, where do you get this idea that a daughter inherits alongside a granddaughter? And there was no person that answered Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's challenge. And remember that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was he? This is the guy who saved Judaism, essentially, at the destruction of the Second Temple shortly before it happened. He was able to get a meeting with the Roman, conqueror. This was Vespasian, and basically impressed him. We told that story at another occasion, but he was able to make a request, and he said, give me the Nasi, right, which is Rabban Gamliel. Give me the sages. Give me Yavne, which is going to be like a little town where we're going to move the Sanhedrin and the seat of learning and the rabbinic tradition, etc., so that the Jews will not lose Judaism. He saw that they were going to lose the temple. This was right on the eve of the destruction of the Holy Temple and the sacrifices, etc. So how was Judaism going to be saved? This is all the whole story with Yochanan ben Zakkai. So that's who we're talking about. So he really was, like his passion and his life's mission was to save Judaism. And this is one of the small battles, this influence of the Sadducees. So he said to them, imbeciles, from where do you derive your ruling? And there was no person that answered him anything, except for one old man who was chattering at him and saying, well, we derive that a daughter inherits alongside a granddaughter through a kal v'chomer inference, like this. And just as a daughter of the son of the deceased, right, the granddaughter, who comes to claim her inheritance from her grandfather by virtue of his son, inherits her grandfather's property, well, so too with regard to the deceased's own daughter, who comes to inherit by virtue of the deceased himself, all the more so is it not clear that she should inherit his property. Right? If the granddaughter is going to inherit from her grandfather, all the more so the daughter of the man should inherit alongside her. That's the Kal V'chomer argument that this old Sadducee was making. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai recited this verse about him from Genesis 36:20. These are the sons of Seir the Horite, the inhabitants of the land, Lotan and Shobal and Zibeon and Anna. And it is written 4 verses later in Genesis 36:24, and these are the children of Zibeon, Aya, and Anna. So it sounds like Anna is the brother of Zibeon, and then in the second verse is the child of Zibeon. So which is it? Is Anna the son or the brother of Zibeon? So rather, this teaches that Zibeon engaged in sexual intercourse with his own mother and begot Anna, so that he was both Anna's father and his brother. And from the fact that the first verse equates Zibeon and Anna by referring to both of them as the sons of Seir, despite Anna being a grandson of Seir, it is clear that grandchildren are equal to children, contrary to the Sadducees' assertion. Now, these are not Jews, right? These are the descendants of Seir. What's Seir? Well, Seir is going to be where Esau ends up, right? So Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. Jacob becomes Israel, the children of Israel. His brother Esau goes off, creates Mount Seir, etc. That whole civilization. And among his descendants are this Zibeon, who I guess sleeps with his own mother and fathers a brother that is both son and brother to him. but it's mentioned in the Torah that is the genealogy of those people. And so we learn out from the Torah that a grandson is considered like a direct descendant, is like a son. And that's why we're going to say that, well, no, the daughter of a son of the man leaving property is closer in line to him even than his own daughter, because it's by way of his son. And sons inherit ahead of daughters. Now, the Gemara interrupts the recounting of that Baraisa and questions this inference that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai just made. But perhaps there were two people named Anna. So that Anna was Zibion's son, and there was another Anna that was his brother. Maybe, they don't have this tradition that children aren't named after living relatives. And so maybe he had a son that he named after his brother. Why? How do we know that they're the same person, that there was this incest? So Rabbah said, I will state a matter that even King Shapur did not state. That even King Shapur did not state. Well, King Shapur was a Persian king. Why would a Persian king be stating matters of Jewish law? In the Jewish community in Bava, which was part of the Persian Empire, at the time that we're talking about these sages having discussions, King Shapur was not only a famous king, not necessarily alive he wasn't alive during all the sages. These sages, there were generations of them in Bavel, speaking in the Talmud Bavli. But King Shapur was one of the most powerful kings of that whole period. In fact, there were multiple kings named Shapur. But what they're saying is that the name Shapur came to be used in the same way that you might say, oh, he's a Babe Ruth, even though Babe Ruth lived many generations ago. If you're saying that, Ohtani, maybe the best player in Major League Baseball right now, who both pitches and hits like insane, home run leader. I don't know if he's the home run leader this year, but, has an absurd number of home runs for a pitcher. And you call him a Babe Ruth, like we know he's not Babe Ruth, he's just using Babe Ruth as a descriptive term. Shapur was used as a descriptive term for the leading sage. So he's saying that now I'm going to state a matter that even our greatest sage has not stated. So who is our greatest sage is what the Gemara is asking right now. I will state a matter, Rabbah says, I will state a matter that even King Shapur did not state, meaning our King Shapur. And who is this King Shapur? This cannot be a reference to as I just said, the king of Persia. Rather, when we talk about our King Shapur, he's talking about Shmuel, whose legal rulings are accepted by the public like the edicts of a king by his subjects. Some state a different version, that it was Rav Papa who said, I will state a matter that even King Shapur did not state. And who is he referring to? His King Shapur he's talking about is Rabbah. At any rate, this great saying that even the greatest sage hadn't stated, but which is an important thing to state, is this. That the verse goes on to state in Genesis 36:24 about this Anna, right? How do we know that he is both the brother and the son of this Zibion? Because Zibion committed incest, rather than that there were two Annas. So the verse goes on to state, this is Anna, indicating that he is the same Anna mentioned initially earlier in the verses. So accordingly, there was only one Anna who was both Zibion's brother and his son. And that way we establish that a grandson has the same kind of direct lineage as a son. So the Baraisa continues, the Sadducees said to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Right, now we're back to this. Right, because Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is refuting the idea that a daughter could inherit alongside a granddaughter when a deceased left only a daughter and a son, but his son died, and then that son left a granddaughter. So the estate goes to the granddaughter, not to the daughter. The Sadducees said, no, the daughter inherits alongside the granddaughter. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is refuting this idea. The Sadducee said the Kal V'chomer, and now the Sadducee says to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, my teacher, you dismiss me with this retort? I agree that the son of a son precedes a daughter, as the verse you quoted about this Anna and Zibion suggests. Okay, a grandson would be ahead of a daughter. I got that. But I am asserting that a granddaughter inherits only alongside the daughter, not to the exclusion of the daughter. And the verse that you have quoted, it has no bearing on my claim. You're talking about a grandson. I'm talking about a granddaughter. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, imbecile. Now we're on page 116a. But will our perfect Torah not be as worthy as your frivolous speech? As your inference is nonsense, fallacious. What is notable about the inheritance of a daughter of the son of the deceased who leaves property? It is notable in that her right is enhanced in that she inherits from her paternal grandfather together with the brothers of her father. Would you say that the same applies with regard to the daughter of the deceased, whose right to inherit is diminished in that she does not inherit from her father together with her brothers? If there were other brothers, she doesn't inherit with them. Right? A daughter does not inherit alongside brothers. That's why this daughter is not going to inherit alongside the children of a son. The son inherits to the exclusion of his sister, and therefore his children inherit from him, even if he has died first, and even if his children are girls. Right? Those girls inherit ahead of their aunts because the Torah says so. And the Sadducees' Kal V'chomer inference is thereby disproved, and the Gemara concludes, and since the Sadducees had no counter argument, the sages were victorious over them, and they established that day, the 24th of Tevet, as a minor festival to celebrate the establishment of the halacha in accordance with the opinion of the sages. Now on page 116a. Having discussed the law of a son's daughter's right to inherit, the Gemara cites a verse that relates to this matter. After the incident known as the concubine in Gibeah, the men of the tribe of Benjamin numbered only 600, and each of these men had inherited large plots of land from their deceased relatives. We won't go into that story right now, but there was a very sad period in history before King David, right? So after Joshua led the children of Israel into the land, and I'm pretty sure before there was a monarch, right before King Saul, etc. Right, I'm pretty sure that's when this Benjamite thing happened. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was during the First Temple period. But at any rate, there was this incident. Somebody remind me when it is, where there was basically a civil war. There was a civil war between the Benjamites and other Jews of the nation. It went very badly for the Benjamites. And most of the Benjamite men died. Right? So there were only 600 of them left. So what happened to these 600 surviving Benjamites? Okay, well, the war ended. And since they survived the war, and we've just been talking about, well, where does inheritance go if there's no children? Well, we go back up to the, to a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a great-great-grandfather who did have living descendants, and then the property gets inherited by them, basically the cousins at some level of removal. And so basically the land of the Benjamites ended up getting distributed among the 600 surviving Benjamites. So for them that survived this war, they ended up with a lot of property. The problem was there were so few of them. So when there's so few of them, it's going to naturally happen more often that they're going to marry outside the Benjamite clan because there's fewer people to choose from within the Benjamite clan. But since there were so few of them and they were holding large pieces of land, at least until the Benjamite tribe would be reestablished, it now became a problem that if a Benjamite, got married, and let's say he married outside the Benjamite clan, and then maybe he only had daughters, and he didn't have sons to inherit from him, and his daughters married outside the Benjamite clan, then large tracts of the portion of Israel known as Benjamin, like the Benjamite region of Israel, those tracts of land would end up being transferred to other tribes. And that became a real problem, a real concern that the sages were dealing with. So now let's get back in and see what they did. Where am I? Right. So after that incident, it says in Judges 21:17. Yeah. So before King Saul, and they said, the verse states, and they said, they that are escaped must be as an inheritance for Benjamin, that a tribe be not blotted out from Israel. Judges 21:17. So what they're saying is, we're going to have to put in some sort of emergency laws to make sure that we don't allow, through lack of sons and daughters marrying out of the tribe, that large portions of the Benjamite region end up in the hands of other tribes. Rabbi Yitzchak of the house of Rabbi Ami says, this teaches that the elders of that generation stipulated with regard to the tribe of Benjamin that a daughter of a son shall not inherit with the brothers of her father, since the daughter of a son who inherits her grandfather's property may later bequeath it to her husband, who may be from another tribe. The elders instituted this temporary ordinance in order to ensure that the other tribes would not inherit large quantities of land belonging to the tribe of Benjamin, lest the tribe of Benjamin be left with very little land of its own. New subject. The Gemara presents a related statement. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, concerning anyone who does not leave behind a son to inherit from him, the Holy One, blessed be he, is filled with wrath, Evra, toward him, as it is written here, if a man die and he has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance, veha'avartem, to his daughter. Numbers 27:8. As it is written, and it is written there in Zephaniah 1:15, that day is a day of wrath, Evra. So the words vehavartem and Evra share common root letters, whereby Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai interprets that God's wrath may be the result of the inheritance passing to a daughter rather than a son, because of this redistribution of land that we were just talking about. Now, they're going to go on and talk about this a little bit more. And it's important just to say at the outset that very many great commentators will lead here with the Ramah, writes that when we're talking about, and it doesn't say in the Torah that God becomes angry with a man who doesn't leave children behind, and particularly male children. We do have elsewhere that there is an obligation to be peru urevu, right, to be fruitful and multiply, which I've talked about a lot. That if it only meant that you are commanded to have children, it would have been enough to say revu, multiply. Make sure that you leave behind members of your species to replace you. But it says peru urevu, be fruitful and multiply. Not everyone has the privilege and the blessing to have children, right? Some people, through no fault of their own, do not have children, so they're not able to be revu, to multiply, but they are able to be fruitful, to be peru, right? To bear fruit. And so bearing fruit in this world means to fulfill your mission, right? To keep asking God, why did you send me into this world? What is the unique contribution that I can make? How can I be helpful to the people around me? What can I create, etc. If you keep asking the question, what was your mission as a soul sent into this world, you'll start to discover the answer. That's my teaching on being fruitful. But there is an obligation to have children. What's interesting, we've talked about this before, is that men are obligated. It's a mitzvah, it's a commandment for men to have children. It's not a commandment for women. Right? Obviously, men can't have kids without women, but especially in the ancient world, it was dangerous for a woman to have childbirth. Some women did not survive. So women who didn't want to have children could opt out. They are not obligated to have children. Men are obligated to have children. Even so, some men are not able to have children, and some men have children, and the children tragically don't survive. So not everyone is able to fulfill that commandment. So this idea that God would be wrathful at men who don't leave behind male offspring, men that don't have sons, is not stated directly. They're saying it's being alluded to in the language that is used, but the Ramah says God is not wrathful at men who don't have sons. God is wrathful at men that don't try to have sons. It's not going to be for everyone to have it. There's all kinds of situations where they won't, but a man should try to have a son, and that's why in terms of the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, we had the dispute. Shammai said that a man fulfills that when he has 2 sons. Hillel, in the law that we follow, a man fulfills that when he has at least 1 son and 1 daughter. And he should keep trying. If he's not married, he should try to get married. If he hasn't had kids, he should try to have kids. If he ends up not being blessed to have kids, okay, he wasn't blessed to have kids, but he tried. So just bear that in mind in this discussion. So the Gemara presents a related statement concerning the verse from Psalm 55, verse 20. God shall hear and humble them, even he that is enthroned of old, Selah, those that have no exchange and fear not God. On this verse, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi each interpret the verse in a different manner. One says that this is a reference to anyone who does not leave behind a son to inherit from him, as he does not leave anyone to serve in exchange, i.e. as a replacement for him. Especially important when we're talking about a patriarchal land-based system in ancient Israel. And the other, right, so one of these two, either Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, said that this verse is a reference to, he doesn't fear God, he doesn't love God if he doesn't leave behind a son. And the other one says that this is a reference to anyone who does not leave behind a student to serve in exchange for him. So not everybody is blessed to have a son, but everyone can be blessed to teach some Torah to someone else. Not everyone is a Torah scholar, but as the Lubavitcher Rebbe famously said, if the only thing you know is Aleph Beis, right, the alphabet, teach Aleph Beis to someone else. I think elsewhere he said, if the only thing you know is A, Aleph, the first letter, teach that to someone else. So you can leave behind the student. And the Gemara notes, and from this, that Rabbi Yochanan and the Gemara suggests it may be concluded that it was Rabbi Yochanan who says that the verse is referring to one who does not leave behind a student. Why are we going to say that Rabbi Yochanan is the one who interprets that verse as somebody who doesn't even leave behind a student? For Rabbi Yochanan, whose 10 sons died in his lifetime. Who can imagine that extent of grief? Rabbi Yochanan, whose 10 sons died in his lifetime, said to those that he would console, meaning when, God forbid, a parent would lose a child, Rabbi Yochanan would come to console the parent and say to them, your grief is unimaginable, but I'm here to tell you that, there's another side. Eventually you will emerge from your grief. And I can tell you that, he says, because he lost 10 sons. So he would come as, just to say, your grief knows no bounds, but it will be finite. You will come out the other side. And he would say, this is the bone of my 10th son. We talked about this elsewhere. He carried just like a tiny little piece of bone from one of the boys, which it's a question, how could he be carrying a bit of corpse? Shouldn't it have been buried? I think it was very small, less than the minimum amount. And for whatever reason, it was permitted to do this. And so he would encourage them not to succumb to their sorrow. Since Rabbi Yochanan knew that he would not leave any sons to inherit his property, it is reasonable to assume that he interpreted the verse as meaning that God is full of wrath toward one who does not leave behind a student. And the Gemara comments that it may be concluded that it was Rabbi Yochanan who says that the verse is referring to one who does not leave behind a student. And the Gemara notes, and from this, that Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says that the verse is referring to someone who does not leave behind a student. It follows that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the one that says that the verse is suggesting that God is wrathful with somebody that did not try to leave behind a son. Now the Gemara asks, but this cannot be. as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi would not go to a house of mourning, a Beit Tanya, to console the bereaved so as not to interpret his studies, except to the house of one who died without any sons. As it is written, weep not for the dead, neither bemoan him, but weep sore for him that goes away. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav says that the verse is referring to one who departs from this world without leaving behind a male child. Okay, so Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was such a diligent Torah scholar that he, it was his, everyone has to stand their post, right? So some are generals on the battlefield. Yehoshua ben Levi is in the study hall 16 hours a day, learning on behalf, of himself, his students, and all Israel. Right? This is certainly a discussion for another day, but the people who say that every Israeli needs to be on the battlefield, that is a view that is strongly disputed by many people, because many, maybe most, and it's the most important job in the world, the ones who are in the IDF fighting. Thank God they're there. But some Israelis need to be in the study hall all day, every day, because if Torah study ever ceases from Israel entirely, then the nation is so vulnerable that it could fall in an instant. Right? So Yehoshua ben Levi was one of those guys that it was his job to be learning in the study hall all day long, every day. That's certainly not for everybody. It's certainly not for the majority. It's for the elite. He's like the Navy SEAL of Torah scholars, putting in crazy hours. So he wouldn't interrupt for anything, even to go to the house of mourning, unless a person died and left behind no sons. Or let's say, let somebody loses his son and is going to leave behind no sons, right? So he would go to console that one because the grief is so immense. So that's somebody who, for whatever reason, he only had one son. Now he's at an age where maybe he's not going to be able to have another, and he just lost his son. For that, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi would go to the house of mourning to console. So from his action, what do we learn? Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav says that this verse is from the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi would console specifically one who died without leaving a son. It is apparent that he does not hold that God is full of wrath towards such an individual, or I guess maybe he's going to console the daughter of this guy who died leaving behind no sons. So there's really no chance it's done. So he's going to console, I guess, the family members. So rather, it must be that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the sage who says that the verse is referring to one who does not leave behind a student, that God is wrathful at one who doesn't even leave behind a student. Well, that would mean that Rabbi Yochanan, who had lost 10 sons himself, would be the one that holds that God is wrathful towards someone who leaves no sons behind. So on top of all his grief of losing his sons, he's the one who holds that God has wrath at him. And the Gemara notes, and from this, that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the one who says that the verse is referring to one who does not leave behind a student. It would follow that Rabbi Yochanan says it is referring to that the wrath of God is against one who doesn't leave behind a son. So the Gemara asks, this poses a difficulty. From one statement of Rabbi Yochanan, that the verse is referring to one who does not leave behind a son, and the other statement of Rabbi Yochanan, as he would say, that this is the bone of my 10th son. And the Gemara answers, it is not difficult. This statement with regard to the bone of his son is his, while that statement with regard to the verse is his teacher's. And that's where that discussion ends. The Gemara continues with 3 homiletic interpretations by Rabbi Pinchas ben Chama and provides a mnemonic to facilitate the memorization of these expositions: Hadad, poverty, and sage. So the Gemara presents the first homiletic interpretation. Rabbi Pinchas ben Chama interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written in 1 Kings 11:21? And when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, right, that King David had died, and that Yoav, the captain of the host, was dead, right, so one of the generals, for what reason is it that in the case of King David, Sleeping was stated with regard to his demise. It said about King David that he slept with his fathers. And in the case of Yoav, death was stated, right? It said that King David slept with his fathers and Yoav had died. So with respect to King David, it said sleep. And with respect to Yoav, it said death when we're talking about the death of both of them. Why? So the answer is concerning King David, who left a son behind, right? King Solomon, sleeping was stated with regard to his demise, as it was not a complete death. While concerning Yoav, who did not leave a son behind, death was stated with regard to his demise, as he left no son to succeed him. He might have left a daughter to carry on his DNA, as it were, but he didn't leave a son to, take his property, take his position in government, to succeed him in his role. Now, the Gemara asks, and is it so that Yoav did not leave a son behind? But isn't it written of the sons of Yoav? Obadiah, the son of Yehiel, in Ezra 8:9. So rather, concerning King David, who left a son as great as himself, sleeping was with regard to his demise, but concerning Yoav, who did not leave a son as great as himself, death was stated with regard to his demise. Now the Gemara presents the second homiletic interpretation. Rabbi Pinchas ben Chama interpreted a verse homiletically and derived that poverty in a person's household is more difficult than 50 plagues. As it is stated, have pity upon me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has touched me. That's Job in Job 19:21. And right after God took everything away from him in a test engineered by the Satan. And so Job's friends, in Hebrew Eov, right, his friends were saying to him, take heed, regard not iniquity, for this have you chosen rather than poverty. So Job, who suffered many plagues, was told by his friends that his suffering was preferable to poverty. And the Gemara presents the third homiletic interpretation, Rabbi Pinchas, and that by that hand of God interpretation we refer to that in the Passover Haggadah, right? That there was 10 plagues in Egypt, which was the finger of God. Well, then at the Red Sea, when Pharaoh and all his chariots drowned in the sea, when all his horsemen died in the sea, that was like 50 plagues, right? Because if one finger is 10 plagues, then a hand is 50 plagues. And the Gemara presents the third homiletic interpretation. The Rabbi Pinchas bar Chama said, anyone who has a sick person in his home should go to a sage, and the sage will ask for mercy on the sick person's behalf, as it is stated, Proverbs 16:14, the wrath of a king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. Right? So obviously everybody, if you're praying for a sick person, a relative, a loved one, you should pray with all your heart. But if you want to strengthen your prayers, as it were, go ask a tzaddik, a righteous person, a wise man, somebody great and learned and holy, to pray with you, right? You're all praying to God, but somebody can sort of strengthen your prayers if he is somebody who sort of has the ear of God, as it were. New subject, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Mishna teaches that this is the principle. Concerning anyone who precedes another with regard to inheritance, his descendants precede the other as well. Right? So we just saw that a son precedes a daughter. So therefore, his kids are going to precede his sister, even if his kids are only another female. Right? So that's why the granddaughter inherits because she's the granddaughter through a son, and the daughter of the deceased, her aunt, does not. So same principle. So concerning anyone who precedes another with regard to inheritance, his descendants precede the other as well, and a father precedes all of his descendants. Rami bar Chama raises a dilemma. With regard to the claim of a father of the deceased's father, right? So the grandfather of the deceased, the father of his father, of the one who died and left property. So with regard to the claim of the father of the deceased's father, and the claim of the brother of the deceased's father, such as the claims of Abraham and Ishmael to the property of Esau, right? So you can get the picture. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, right? So, but his grandson by way of Isaac would be Jacob, and his other grandson, Abraham's other grandson, would be Esau. So let's say now Esau dies. So if he has a son, does the son inherits from Esau? Let's say he has no children. Then who inherits him? Do we go to Jacob or do we go back up to Isaac? And let's say that Isaac had already died and Abraham is still alive. So do we go back up to Abraham or do we go over to his uncle Ishmael? So let's see. So look at this case, such as the claims of Abraham and Ishmael to the property of Esau, who was Abraham's grandson and Ishmael's nephew. Which of them precedes the other and inherits the property? So Rava said, come and hear a proof from the Mishnah. A father precedes all of his descendants. Therefore, Abraham would inherit, as Ishmael was his descendant. And the Gemara asks, and why did Rami Bar Chama have a dilemma? Was he not aware of the statement of our Mishnah? Okay, so questions or comments, please get them in now. Here we go. Now we're on page 116b, which we're going to be on for a very short time. The Gemara answers, due to his keen mind, he did not analyze the Mishnah carefully. In other words, Rami Bar Chama was learning a lot of Mishnayos quickly, and so he didn't perceive the import of one of them. He didn't analyze so deeply because he was memorizing so many of them. So Rami Bar Chama raised a dilemma. With regard to the claim of a father, of the deceased's father, right? So Abraham with respect to Esau, and the claim of the deceased's brother, right? So this would be Jacob with respect to Esau, or Ishmael with respect to Isaac. Which of them precedes the other, inherits the property? So Rava said, come and hear a proof from the Mishnah. A father precedes all of his descendants. Therefore, Abraham would inherit, as Jacob was his descendant. So if Esau dies, Abraham would inherit his property before his brother Jacob would inherit. So the Gemara, if Abraham was still alive. So the Gemara asks, and why did Rami Bar Chama have a dilemma? Presumably he was aware of the statement of the Mishnah. And the Gemara answers, Rami Bar Chama understood that the Mishnah teaches that a father precedes only his own immediate descendants, but not the descendants of his son. So, but if we can go back to grandpa and grandpa's still alive, he would inherit. And if great-grandpa was still alive, he would inherit. We go back as far, as long as there's a living patriarch, he would inherit, and then it would go back down the line once he dies. Now, the Gemara notes that so too it is reasonable to understand the Mishnah in that manner, as it teaches, this is the principle. Anyone who precedes another with regard to inheritance, his descendants precede the other as well. And if Isaac were alive, Isaac would precede Abraham and inherit Esau's property. You might have thought. Now, also, when Isaac is not alive, Jacob should precede Abraham because of the principle that the descendants of one who precedes another with regard to the inheritance also precede the other. And the Gemara conclude from this clause of the Mishnah that the brother of the deceased precedes the grandfather. That's the opposite of what we were just saying. So let's see. If one dies childless, his inheritance passes to his father. Or in the event of the father's death, his father's children. If the father himself also has no living descendants, then the inheritance passes to the deceased's grandfather and his descendants, right? So we do go back up to the direct chain of fathers. Okay, let me just scan for questions since Nina cannot pass them to me. Says Sharon, Jacob took Joseph's sons as his own, and they got full tribal land rights to the other brothers, alongside the other brothers, right? Exactly. Manasseh and Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, filled in the 12 tribes with respect to land. Why? Because the tribe of Levi didn't get land, right? I'm a Levite. The Levites, God is their portion. They ended up in cities. They ended up serving. They received tithes from the other tribes, but they didn't get land. So since there were 12 brothers, right, 12 sons of Jacob, and one of them, the Levite tribe, didn't get land, you would think that Israel was apportioned into 11 areas. But it was 12 because Joseph didn't get land in the name of Joseph. He contributed 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. So grandsons were reckoned at the same level as sons. It says, Sharon, wouldn't that be proof about the potential status of grandchildren? I think that's a great question. And I guess maybe the refutation would be, well, Jacob did that through a direct statement from his mouth, like a last will and testament. And we've said a bunch of times, right, that you can give your property to whoever you want, and the laws of inheritance only step in and dictate who gets what in the absence of a will. So Jacob saying, I'm going to give it to my grandchildren and make them full tribe, at the level of tribes like my other 11 sons, would be like a will rather than a precedent, a legal precedent of what to do in the absence of a will. Tom, are today's Karaites considered the descendants of the Sadducees? My understanding is that even though they have the similar idea, only hold by the written Torah, not by the teachings of the Rabbanim, is that similar, but not a direct inline descent from the Sadducees. That's how I've heard it before. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong and let me know. Tom, does the granddaughter have the same obligation to care for her aunt that the brother would have had? Maybe you said that before I said it. I was speculating. It seems to me that would be that same obligation, since it's being passed down, through that son who would have had the same obligation. I would think that the grandchildren are going to have that obligation toward their aunt, but I can't guarantee it. And Bill is saying the same thing, intellectual descendants, but not direct descendants on that same question. Joe, when my grandfather died, he left no will, so his estate went to probate, right? Dina de Malchusa Dina. You die in America, you don't leave a will. We can't just say, okay, well, we're going to distribute the assets according to Torah law because we live in America. In America, the law of the land is the law. We have to respect the law of the land. So an estate goes into probate, not according to Torah law, but according to the laws of the state that is going to be adjudicating the matter. So, says Joe, my grandmother received 1/2 of his money, but there was a debate about the other half of his progeny. He was predeceased by both of his sons, and there was a point of contention about the distribution of funds. One take was that the money was to be split equally among all the grandchildren, while the other was that the money was to be divided equally between the estates of the 2 sons, with each family dividing it among the children of that family. So you could say, like, maybe one side, produced 2 grandchildren and the other side produced 10 grandchildren. So if you, split it at this level, these 2 sons, which seems fair, right? These are the 2 sons, the 2 families, but those sons predeceased. Now, when you get to the level of the grandsons, if you divide equally among all the grandsons, well, then these 10 over here would, have a much better outcome than if you split equally among the sons up here, and then at the next level, there's 10 versus 2, right? Then the 10 are going to get much less than the 2. Right? So that, I can understand how there was an argument. It wound up that the funds were shared equally, I guess, among all the grandchildren, because all the descendants were of equal degrees of distance from our grandfather. If only one son had died, then he would have received 1/4 of the estate, and the children of the deceased son would split the remaining quarter among them. Thus was my first encounter with the law. And you could see why it's very difficult and why both sides could make a good argument when you're just talking about what's, sort of logical, what's rational. But the numbers end up very different according to which view prevails. and everybody, is biased in the sense that they're one side of the family or the other, and they're affected by the outcome. And that's why it's nice to have the law established clearly before you get to probate, and even better if the deceased just makes their views known in a will. Sharon, the horrific events about the concubine of the Levite occurred during the time of the Judges, when everyone did exactly. So I asked that before I realized we were talking about the book of Judges, so before King Saul, King David, etc. Thank you. And everyone else is saying Hag Sameach, interesting lesson, very good. No questions on the YouTube side. And Joseph says, having sons are like having students, but if you can't have a son, then find a spiritual son to give a spiritual inheritance. Beautiful. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. We go into Sukkot tonight, so no class tomorrow, Thursday, no class Friday, no class Saturday until Saturday night. I am planning to teach Motzi Shabbos at our usual, Saturday night time. And then hopefully Sunday from the Sukkah. So as we enter Sukkot, I bless all of us. Please God, may we enter Sukkot and with rejoicing and with nothing but good news. And may we enjoy Sukkot with nothing but good news. And may we emerge from Sukkot at the end of the holiday with nothing but good news. All the best.